Welcome to Tales of American History, the Witnessing History Education Foundation podcast, educating Americans to understand the history of their country and of other countries so that they will appreciate the value of America's unique free institutions. I am Genevieve Brown, and today our host, Kent Masterson Brown, and I are speaking with our special guest, Mel Hankla. This podcast is sponsored by donors who support the Witnessing History Education Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. Become an American hero who participates in our mission by joining us at witnessinghistory.org, the website of the Witnessing History Education Foundation. All gifts are tax deductible and support the Foundation's work of making high-quality films, podcasts, and teacher education materials available to the public worldwide free of charge. View the Foundation's documentary films on the website and on the Foundation's new YouTube platform. View also the Foundation's free teacher education materials that conform to grade-level education standards at the website and at pbslearning.org. Follow Witnessing History on Facebook and Twitter. Now, take a journey back through time with Kent Masterson Brown and his guest, Mel Hankla, and let their storytelling transport you to the most compelling moments in American history. Dr. Hankla has recently authored a beautiful book, richly illustrated with color photography, entitled Into the Bluegrass: Art and Artistry of Kentucky's Historic Icons. He's a native Kentuckian and has a distinguished academic background. He's the founder of American Historic Services, LLC, the Contemporary Long Rifle Association, and he also serves as the editor of CLA's magazine, American Tradition. He's on the advisory board of the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts in Salem, North Carolina, and he's a member of the American Society of Arms Collectors. We're very proud that he joins us today in Lexington for our podcast. Welcome, Dr. Hankla.
Mel, I want to thank you, first of all, for being here. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you. And I got to tell you, your book is got to be one of the most beautiful books I think I have ever seen on any subject. And the fact that it is into the bluegrass and the story of Kentucky's great icons makes it even more remarkable in that you talk about things that came out of Kentucky's early years that very few people have ever talked about. And the one thing you notice if you just flip through the pages, and by the way, for all of those who are listening, this is the most beautifully illustrated book one can imagine. Most of the illustrations are in color. Many of the illustrations that you see are of rifles. When we're going to go into those, they're what you would call Kentucky rifles. But there are other things. And hollowware, coin silver ladles, furnishings, chest of drawers, desks, bookcases, produced during the very early years of Kentucky's existence and its statehood. And it makes Mel for an absolutely gorgeous piece of work. And I want to first of all congratulate you on it. It's just beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. It's something that I really had in mind to do for many, many years, probably 25 or 30 anyway. And 2 years ago now at the Kentucky History Center, I was the curator for an exhibit that we called Into the Bluegrass, Rifles of Frontier Kentucky.
Yeah.
It was co-sponsored between the Kentucky History Center and the Kentucky Long Rifle Foundation. And I was able to pull together maybe as many as half of the artistic Kentucky long rifles that are in existence, along with artifacts that belong to General George Rogers Clark and some other greats from the state of Kentucky. But that was the impetus for the book. I started building a catalog, if you will, writing a catalog to have to go along with this exhibit that was up for 6 months at the Kentucky History Center. And the next thing I knew, I was 200 pages into a book. and I just realized that it was time. It was time to start, telling this story. And I just kept seeing this tapestry, if you will, of Kentucky's cultural fabric, and I just wanted to write about it and educate. I consider myself an educator, and I've worked in education pretty much my entire life.
Yeah.
And so this was a way for me to do that. It was a way before I forgot some of this stuff, and as the book grew, I started looking for things to add, whether it be, wonderful early Kentucky pottery that was made up on the river in Vanceburg and Maysville, or silver by Asa Blanchard here in Lexington, or some of the wonderful furniture that was made across the state of Kentucky. And I just felt that it all had a place. It all needed to be blended together, and these colors put together in this tapestry.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. There was somewhat of a predecessor book to yours, and that was the book that came out not too many years ago called Collecting Kentucky, and but it was more about furnishings, really all about furnishings, coined silver, flatware, hollowware, all of those kind of things. What's remarkable about yours is the introduction of the Kentucky rifle to all of this, and in fact, even pipe tomahawks, even carved or scrimshawed powder horns. All those things are now interjected into this story of Kentucky's artistry by your book. And, but for the rifle, there wouldn't have been any of the other forms of artistry, would there?
Well, no, you're exactly right. And G.G. Lacer and she and now I'm drawing a blank on her last name's Howard, but anyway, that produced Collecting Kentucky. What a wonderful book that is, and they featured 7 or 8, maybe even 9 of the extensive collections of Kentucky antiquities in their book. But what I wanted to do with this, first of all, there's nothing in the book that I don't or can't lay my hands on a primary document to authenticate it. And really the book is not about the artifacts that are the illustration in the book, but it's really about the stories of either their makers or their owners.
Right. And
all of these people tie together. And as you was kind of alluding to a while ago, I've tried to talk about this book as a tapestry. And all cloth, when it's woven, there is a particular thread called a weft that holds that piece of cloth together. All of the other threads are woven on the weft. And the Kentucky rifle that you mentioned is such an iconic thing. You go anywhere in the world and you say Kentucky rifle, and they envision this long-barreled rifle with a beautiful patch box, and either Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone from the and that's who really made it famous in our lifetime was Fess Parker and Walt Disney, and traveling all over and doing these Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett series. But this iconic Kentucky long rifle is truly the weft of Kentucky's cultural fabric. And this cultural fabric is beautiful. But if it hadn't have been for this rifle, when people come into Kentucky, first of all, most had come from places where guns were illegal. They had never before needed a rifle, needed something to go to war with or to protect themselves with, or to feed themselves with. Never before had they had to worry about a cougar or a mountain lion or a bear or the other kinds of animals that, as the pioneers come in and tried to cross through the Cumberland Gap or in some way get across the Appalachian mountain chain and to frontier Kentucky, there were so many things, including the Indians, that they needed this rifle for. But without it, they didn't eat. Mm-hmm. Without it, they didn't. One of the quotes in the book, one of the great things, somebody was asked, a Kentucky frontiersman was asked, said, well, why did you come to Kentucky? He said, I came to see a fine brick house rise out of the canebrake. And it took this rifle. This rifle was the number one tool of the day.
Yeah.
And they were very, very artistic. Now, that's not to say they all were, because there were many cheaply made rifles that even the common man could have owned. But as we know, Lexington by 1800 was called the Athens of the West.
Right.
So these wonderful long rifles were being produced here in Lexington at Waveland Plantation by the Bryan family.
Right.
There's an old chapter in the book on the Bryan family, and then that even goes into the powder horns that you'd mentioned a while ago. The Tanzel family from Georgetown started producing this group of powder horns. But all of these things come together and hold this weft, this tapestry of our cultural fabric together. And as the book started to mature, I had to start doing some research. I didn't know anything about Kentucky pottery, and I reached out to some people that I knew that had been students. Brenda Heindel, that I had met through the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Art. She worked in the library there and had done several wonderful talks about the pottery out of Maysville, Kentucky, and Vanceburg, Kentucky, and using her research as a foundation, I was able to learn more to where I could kind of hack out a chapter on not so much on the pottery, but again the people that were making the pottery, the stories of these potters, and but I wanted to fill it all. I know one of the most interesting chapters in the book to me, and when I say chapters, a lot of these could be vignettes. They're only three or four pages long, less than a lot of them, 1,500 words. But I wanted it to be that way because I know a lot of times if I'm laying in bed and I'm looking through a book and the next chapter, is 10, 12, 14 pages long, I'm not going to invest any more time. I'm going to go and go to bed. But if it's a couple of 3, 4 pages, I'm going to read this. So I wanted to make it an easy read. But I wanted all of these stories to blend together, all of these colors to blend together, whether it be the Kentucky Penitentiary, and I talk about the early justice here in the state of Kentucky, and as well as all of the silver makers, all of the other things. Again, we're living in a difficult time right now. There's so many people in our country, you say this word gun or rifle, and they immediately build up this wall. And they're not going to look. They're not even going to take a chance to say, well, what is this? And in that day, this rifle, this Kentucky rifle, was the number one tool of the day. Yeah. 10 years ago, I would have said it would have been like the automobile. Now it's closer to the cell phone. But the difference with that rifle, it was a status symbol, much like an automobile. Yeah. And the study of these rifles, I'm going to say a lot of the people that's listening to this, if they meet 1957 Chevrolet coming down the highway, they're going to be able to recognize it. Yeah. And they're going to be able to tell the difference between it and a 55 Ford. And if you study these rifles, they're the same way. A lot of times you can pick one up with no signature. You can tell within 10 or 15 miles of where it was made and within 4 or 5 years of when it was made, just by the subtle differences in their architecture.
Wow. There's a great endorsement of your book by Frank House. And I want to read this to the listeners because it really sums up kind of my feelings about your book. He says, whether a seasoned artist, impassioned collector, dedicated historian, or one who simply calls the Bluegrass State home, there is much to be gleaned from Dr. Mel Hankla's lifelong love affair with everything Kentucky. Stories of priceless treasures, tales of pioneer men and women, victories and triumphs, epic struggles and tragic losses, all the while deftly knitting a narrative that places historic and invaluable icons into a tangible, exciting story of a robust and dynamic frontier Kentucky. Now that is a daggone good endorsement.
That's pretty well said, isn't it? I don't think I could have said that way.
And of course, coming from a real gun maker himself, Frank House, but it does tell all of it. I want to go into a little discussion here for a second about his words, pioneer men and women, victories and triumphs, epic struggles and tragic losses. We have all of that in Kentucky's frontier history. These people came in to Kentucky, which, Mel, it was not settled by anybody at all when they arrived.
No.
We often hear, and at times when we play the film we made on the life of Daniel Boone, people might say, well, he took the land of the Native Americans. Well, he didn't. There were no Native Americans in Kentucky. By 1754, the last small trading post, which was now settled in Clark County, Kentucky, called Escapakathiki, had vanished. And that was it. Now, it was used to hunt by the tribes in the north as well as the south, but none of them lived here. And so they come into this part of the world, and they come in here at a time, 1774, 1775, when the world now is at war again. And Britain and the colonies are at war, and the British side with the tribes, simply because they don't have the manpower to do it themselves. And so you get this horrific, bloody struggle out here for this area, for this region. And truly, it is a land where there were victories and triumphs and epic struggles, but also tragic losses. Were there not?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And, just to get here, and again, I started to mention this a while ago, the vast majority of people that were coming into Kentucky were new immigrants to America. Mm-hmm. We've got to remember that America was in its infancy. And so many of these people were coming over on the boats. They didn't stay long in Philadelphia or along the eastern seaboard. And they started this migration westward, this westward expansion of America that ultimately went all the way to California and the West Coast.
Yeah.
But there were terrible tragedies on all sides. There was tragedies with the Indians. The Indians were fighting amongst themselves. The Shawnees was fighting the Cherokees and the Seminoles and I've had people argue, well, they were living in Kentucky. Well, there were camps. There were people that were coming here and staying here, but the vast majority of them were renegades and they'd been run off by their tribes.
That's right.
And then you've got Richard Henderson in 17 and I can't recall the date. I believe it's 17 and gosh, anyway, I've forgotten. But he literally traded with the Indians for $50,000 worth of gewgaws of shiny silver and beads and things for all of the land south. Again, I'm gonna lie if I start talking about these boundaries, but it's basically from the Ohio River over to the Kentucky River and down to the Cumberland River. So it was a huge section of ground that he illegally traded for from the Indians, and the Indians were as mad about it as because the people that traded it to him didn't have the authority or the ownership to do that. But it was going to be the new Transylvania, and this word Transylvania means across the woods. And Boone, that's how Boone ended up into Kentucky, because he was hired by Richard Henderson to blaze the trail, the Wilderness Road, and Boonesboro was going to be the capital, the new capital of Transylvania.
Right.
So there was just movement going on. It was an expansion. It was immigration, and it was the tracks of immigration as new Americans were heading westward.
Yeah. That the treaty that Henderson negotiated with the Shawnee with the Cherokee rather, at Sycamore Shoals, down on the Watauga River, was in March 1775.
Okay.
And Daniel Boone would be hired by him to cut a road, a path, from Cumberland Gap to the Kentucky River, what is now we call the Kentucky River. And yeah, you're right, and that would be the capital, wherever that was on the bank of the Kentucky River. And Boone got to what is now the site of Boonesboro on April 1st, having cut that path with a large group of axemen. But a lot of people don't connect this dot, and that's April 1st. 18 days later, on April 19, were the opening shots on the Lexington Green in Massachusetts that started the American Revolution. And that thing would expand across all the colonies and the territories beyond the Appalachians. And the war out here was particularly rough, particularly difficult, and particularly bloody. And I was flipping through, Mel, some work that our late friend J. Winston Coleman put together. And for the British to begin an invasion of Kentucky in 1780, this is the summer of 1780, there was a record, an account of what the British were going to give to the combined tribes that would join the invasion. And first of all, there were 750 pounds of vermilion, and that was used for paint, put on their faces.
Yes, yes.
8,000 pounds of powder, 14,975 ball, lead, and shot for the rifles, muskets.
Yes.
476 dozen scalping knives, and 188 tomahawks is what they gave the tribes on the eve of they launching that invasion. And you mentioned in your book how one of your favorite gunsmiths settled on the banks of the South Fork of the Licking River, right across from the site of Ruddle Station and right near Martin Station.
Yes.
In Bourbon County. And, of course, it was those two stations that were struck by that invasion force. And, in a gruesome way, where the British had artillery pieces with them, 2 of them. They threatened to open fire, and Captain Isaac Ruddle, agreed to surrender Ruddle Station. And then the British lose control of the tribes, and they go in and begin massacring people. Yeah. Once they kill as many as I guess they wanted and took prisoners with the rest out of Ruddle Station, they crossed over and did the same thing to Martin Station. And these are the tragedies that House is talking about in his comment about your book. And we lose sight of just what a struggle it was to settle Kentucky and what was the West beyond the Appalachian Mountains. And yet it's fascinating that the rifle is the thing that's used to defend this place and to provide for food as well. But that, no sooner had that war finally come to an end. In Kentucky, it was long after the Treaty of Paris in 1783, but nevertheless, by the mid-1780s, you're starting to see civilization explode here. And it's this remark by J. Winston Coleman. He says, it's in your book. It says, the mark of the tomahawk was still fresh on the forest trees when early travelers to Kentucky noted with surprise the exquisite silverware on the frontier. And what's so fun about your book is that the very men who made the rifles were the ones who many of them were also making the silver.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, They again, I go back to Lexington, Kentucky, this Bluegrass region being the Athens of the West. And by 1800, we've got people coming in that's leaving records that, that it's comparable to Philadelphia, the artwork and the furniture. And it was a cosmopolitan region. And they talk about early Kentucky, and I've never really seen it written, but it's one of the first places that there was not a lot of discrimination going on. Even the Irish in the Bluegrass region, I'm not saying everywhere, but in the Bluegrass region, everyone was being welcomed in. Everyone was working together, and it was quite a place. It was quite a utopia there for many years.
Yeah. I mean, even frankly, I remember in one of Winston Coleman's texts in a pamphlet he did on the British invasion of Kentucky, even the commander of the British in Detroit, who gave the okay for Henry Byrd to launch that invasion that ended up at Ruddle Station, he commented that the land these settlers who are pouring into Kentucky, the land these settlers want is second to none on earth in terms of its fertility and usefulness. Now, that's a British officer from Detroit making a statement like that because he's hearing this place is absolutely spectacular.
Well, and there was a whole, there was a large percentage of the group at Ruddleton Martin Station that were Germans, and they'd moved into here from the Brock's Gap region of what is now Rockingham County, Virginia. Well, they had friends and family that had come in and had settled around the Ruddleton Martin Station's region, and they were captured. They were either killed or they were taken by Byrd and the Indians to Detroit. Well, by 1783, you had friends and family moving in to pick up the pieces and see what was left and to take those lands that had been claimed. So there's a constant stream of these Virginians that had been here way early, that had come in the 1740s and had stayed in the Brock's Gap region for 25 or 30 years. But there was a huge migration of these Virginians that was coming into Kentucky to pick up the pieces.
Yeah. Let me go into a few. Just I want you to talk about a few gunsmiths.
Okay.
It's interesting, Mel, too. You can look at like Joe Kendig's book on thoughts on the Kentucky rifle in the Golden Age. Spectacular book. Yes. It's unbelievable.
It's the Bible.
It's the Bible. But those guns are all, Pennsylvania gunsmiths, and for the most part. And what's so interesting, and they call those Kentucky rifles too, by the way.
Yes.
But what you have delved into are ones who made those rifles in Kentucky. So they are true Kentucky rifles.
Yes.
And I touched upon this just a minute ago when we talked about Ruddles and Martin Station, the Humble brothers settling in not too far from, I think Conrad Humble was the one who settled right near the site of Martin Station.
Yes.
Tell the viewers about them, the Humble boys.
I'm going to back up just a minute to this moniker, if you will, of Kentucky Rifle.
Yeah.
There's been an age-old Cold War, if you will, between the state of Pennsylvania and the state of Kentucky over the nomenclature of this gun. And I said a while ago you could go anywhere in the world and say Kentucky Rifle, and they knew what you were talking about. Well, and I believe it was 1963. There's actually a chapter in the book about this. Bill Scranton from Pennsylvania, the governor of Pennsylvania, had issued a challenge to the state of Kentucky, to the shooters of Kentucky, and he wanted for us to take 15 marksmen, bring them to Boone's home place in Pennsylvania, right outside of Reading, and have a shooting match. And if they beat us, the name for Here Ever After was going to be Pennsylvania Rifle. And their logic of it is that that really Pennsylvania and the eastern seaboard of Virginia is where this gun evolved into what we know it as the Kentucky rifle today. Right. However, where it was made famous and where these guns were being made to use was Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And Kentucky at that time was across the woods. It was across the mountains. It would have included Tennessee and Ohio. This term, Kentucky was where people were going to, this first wave of migration. Yeah. But it's just, the Umbel brothers is part of the bunch that moved from Rockingham County, Virginia, into the Ruddles Mills area. The earliest gunsmith that we have recorded or that we can document, there's Squire Boone was a gunsmith, but there's none of his guns that we can document. There's none signed. There is a tomahawk that descended in his family that family history says that he made it, and I think he probably did because he was trained in Philadelphia and would have been a wonderful gun maker. But there's something more to this. Again, I said a while ago talking about this status symbol. These rifles were not only a status symbol to the owner but to the maker. And Michael Umbel come in with James Harrod. He was here by 1774. He was an armorer for George Rogers Clark when he started out from Louisville. Actually, there's a historical marker on the corner of Main and 7th Street in Louisville of Michael Umbel's gun shop. And
it's cool.
And he's buried by 1783. He was in right on the Mercer-Boyle County lines. There's and he's buried there. But then we've also found the remnants of his gun shop there.
Really?
And
really?
So his gun shop was there. We know where his gun shop was at. Then Conrad moved in later. He wasn't here until probably, again, I'm thinking 1787. I'm having trouble recalling dates today for some reason. But he had a son named Noah. And Noah actually apprenticed with his Uncle Michael, and there was even after Conrad died, he actually died in 1790. And there's only one rifle known that's signed by him. It's featured in the book. Yeah. And I guess now we have 3 rifles that are signed by Michael, one that belonged to Captain James Floyd, that's still in the family. And then there's and you mentioned Joe Kendig, the Michael Umbel rifle come from the Kendig collection.
Is that right?
And I had been able to purchase the Conrad Umbel rifle, and I'd started pouring through the books, and this Thoughts on the Kentucky Rifle in its Golden Age that Kendig wrote in 1960 is considered the Bible, if you will, in the long rifle, the Kentucky rifle world. And I'm going to go back to this right quick too. Even in Pennsylvania, we've got documents now. For a long time, people kept saying this Kentucky rifle come from the song "The Battle of New Orleans" that was done, after the Battle of New Orleans. But it was really common. This term was really common by 1803 in New York, Baltimore, London, newspapers to describe this gun. Yeah. But we now have a document that's dated 1798 from a Pennsylvania gun shop listing what he made, and one of the type of firearms that he made were Kentucky rifles.
Wow, really?
So even in Pennsylvania, this term was being used. Yeah. But going back to Michael Umbel and Joe Kendig, I'd started studying and I'd went to Kendig's, and we're talking about 600 rifles. It just kind of leaned up against the wall, and I started going through these rifles, and I didn't see anything, and he'd told me nothing was for sale, but anyway, I was really wanting to buy something.
I can only imagine.
And so I'd went all through all of these guns, and my friend Earl Lanning that I dedicated the book to, that's kind of my mentor and my daddy and best friend, and who's now 88 years old and still going strong. But he was talking to old Joe, and they were having a conversation. And I thought, man, I better go through these again. And halfway around the room, now not once all day. These are so many. We're talking in excess of 600. Gosh. So there's so many rifles. You kind of have to have a rhyme or a reason, and it's real overwhelming. So I was kind of going from my left to the right, the same way that I would read. Now, not once during the day had I ever reached back.
Yeah.
I'd always pulled out what was in front of me and look at it and went on to the next one.
Yeah.
And I was halfway around the room, and for some reason, I reached back maybe 3 feet, a long reach, and picked up a gun, picked up a rifle. And one of the things as a collector and as a student of these rifles for years, in looking at a rifle, I've made it an exercise to not look for a signature, but rather to look at the artwork and to test myself, to teach myself how to locate where this rifle was made by its architecture and by its artwork, and when it was made by those same subtle architectural differences. But this time, immediately, when I picked it up, I rolled it over, and I could clearly see HUMBLE on top of the barrel.
Oh, geez.
And the only reason that I could read that was because I had seen the Conrad Umbel.
Yeah.
And I it immediately. Wow. And I would have never thought that Joe Kendig had heard a word of anything that I was saying, and his daughter was there, Jennifer, and Jennifer said, "What have you found?" And Joe just kind of stopped, and he stuck his arm out, and he said, "Your man Umbel, eh?" Now, the Joe Kendig I'm talking about is now 97 years old, and he is the son of Joe Kendig Jr. that wrote the book in 1960.
Gosh,
so he's, this gentleman's lived his life there, and he goes on to tell me, he said, my father died confused about the name on this rifle. He had no idea. He knew it was different, but he had no idea who made it. And
Wow.
you've closed a circle, and I'm going to sell it to you.
Wow.
It was kind of like buying a house.
I'll bet.
But we bought it and we brought it home.
Wow, that is such a great story. Yeah, Joe, for those of you, Joe Kendig wrote a book called Thoughts on the Kentucky Rifle in the Golden Age. The Golden Age meaning the age where these were really beautifully not only carved wood stocks, curly maple, but it was the furnishings on them. The patch box were intricate, and they became a work of art. And so he cataloged in this huge book all these rifles, photographs of them and their makers and descriptions. It is a stunning book. And I got to tell you, on a personal level, our mutual friend, Clemens Powell from Danville, Kentucky, came up to my office once. I lived in Danville for a while and moved my law office to Danville. And he came up to my law office once with the Kendig book, and he put it on my desk, and he said, "I'd like you to have that." And there's no finer fella in the world, a more sincere friend than Clem Powell. He was just a terrific, terrific character, and it's a book I treasure to this day. But Kendig, for everybody, was literally put together as has been said, the Bible on the Pennsylvania Kentucky rifle, as he likes to refer to it at times. Guns made in Pennsylvania but are known as the Kentucky rifles.
That's the terminology for them. And, I want to go back to Clem just a minute. What a wonderful fella. And there's different people got different opinions of Clem. But I wouldn't have done what I've done. I wouldn't have been able to have accomplished this book or the research that I've done if it hadn't have been Clem.
Yeah.
And I was telling you earlier that him and my father had known one another growing up and were stationed close by in the military. But again, going back to Earl Lanning, that I dedicated one of the people that I dedicated my book to, and in the front of the book you'll see a bronze that Earl did of Simon Kenton.
Yes.
But my father died when I was 20, and when I was 23, I met Earl, and Earl took me to Clem's, and it was such a rude awakening. And at that time, I was working on my doctorate degree, and Earl looked at me and he said, "You need to forget about that book learning. You need to spend all of that time with Clem Caldwell, and you'll learn a whole lot more than you will sitting in front of some professor." And he was correct. And I finished my coursework, and I literally done that. Clem was getting long in the tooth and getting some age, but we had a date every Wednesday for a number of years. Yeah. I'd pick him up at noon. We'd go to Long John Silver's and get a fish sandwich, and then we'd drive around Danville and Boyle, all the different areas, and I learned so much from Clem.
Yeah.
And it's really, really, I just can't say enough about how much of a mentor that he was to me.
Let me tell the folks, Clem Powell lived in Danville, lived on the road to Harrodsburg out of Danville in a Greek Revival home, beautiful house, that stood on the site of Cowell Station. That station is on John Filson's 1784 map of Kentucky. Yeah, Cowell Station. And I asked Clem. I said, "Clem, tell me, were you born in Danville?" He said, "Yeah, I was born in this house." And he says, "I'm the 8th generation born in this house, in this family." Well, I mean, there was smack you right in the face. I mean, here is the flesh and blood of the very people you and I are talking about.
Absolutely.
And what's interesting about Clem is that it's not only him, it's his mother, it's his grandmother, his great-grandmother were all collectors of Kentucky artifacts, principally Indian arrowheads, axe heads, all sorts of things that mostly the prehistoric Indians left behind, who did not exist anymore in Kentucky when Daniel Boone came in. And there were historic Indians, but they were in Ohio or in what is now Tennessee. But they collected these things. So the collecting of things like this was just embedded in his family because of their history here. I don't think I ever was in a place with a person who had such a connection to Kentucky's frontier as Clem Powell.
Absolutely. And each one of those, if you've obviously been there, and he had such a wonderful collection of Indian artifacts, but his mailbox was quite a walk from the house. Uh-huh. And every day he would pick one Indian rock and put it in his pocket, and he would rub it and hold it while it's in his pocket all the way to the mailbox. While he was walking, he said he always thought about the person that made it.
Wow.
And then when he left the mailbox, he put it in his other hand, in his other pocket. And on the way back, he always thought about who used it.
Wow.
And that's
that gives me goosebumps.
Well, but that's part of the book.
Yeah.
That's what I have done with this book is we talk about a tomahawk, and Meriwether Lewis's tomahawk is in the book.
Yeah.
I don't talk much about the tomahawk. I've got great, wonderful photographs of it, but what I want to talk about is Meriwether Lewis. Mm-hmm. I want to tell Meriwether Lewis's story. And that's throughout this entire book. If I could not find a document, it's like Daniel Boone. I was closing up on the book, and I didn't have anything about Daniel Boone. There's just so few artifacts that you can really document. And out of the blue, this beaver trap showed up that had belonged to the Huntington Museum of Art.
Yeah,
and all of a sudden, here's a story. I can't say that it's Boone's, but there's a wonderful family history that says that Daniel Boone gave this to Patty Huddlestone. The family's now Huddleston, but the authenticity of the story and the provenance is dead on. Yeah. So all of a sudden, it allowed me to include Boone and talk about. Yeah. I had even from Kentucky. I knew of Boone's Kentucky escapades. I had no idea he'd spent 14 years in West Virginia.
Yeah.
Up on the canal.
On the canal.
So as I wrote this book, I learned so much about Kentucky's history and all of these little tidbits, all of these splashes of color, if you will, in the tapestry of our culture fabric.
It is a tapestry indeed. Clem too, and I'll end it here with Clem, but he also, of course, had a collection of Kentucky rifles, and one of them he had was Hancock Taylor's,
yes,
and who came in with Boone's party that opened the Wilderness Road, and was killed, and but on the walls were all the rifles. And all around in glass cases were all the Indian artifacts. It was, I can't even begin to tell you how I felt in that room. With him.
I know exactly how you felt because I felt the same way. And the first American long rifle, the first Kentucky rifle I ever bought was from Clem, and I'm sure you've held it. It's featured in the book. It's signed by Jacob Young. It's in the chapter "Unexpected Artistry of the Southern Frontier," and It probably has influenced my artistry and my thought processes about Kentucky as much as anything ever has.
Yeah. That wasn't the gun that William Whitley carried, is it?
No, well, okay. William Whitley's gun was also by Jacob Young.
Yes.
It's still at the William Whitley house. It's belonged, I'm not for sure who really owns that rifle. But anyway, it's at the William Whitley house in Stanford, Kentucky. Wonderful. Again, a wonderful story. In that chapter, there's great pictures. The William Whitley's house was it was on the Wilderness Road, and all of the greats had stopped there. And William Whitley is a name that we just don't hear that much about, and he was every bit as important as Daniel Boone.
Anybody, absolutely.
And like Simon Kenton,
right.
More people know Simon
right.
Kenton, but William Whitley, was so important. And another chapter, one of my favorites. You were talking a while ago about Boone and him settling Boonesboro and the Henderson, land grant or grab, if you want to call it. One of the people that came in with Boone was William Calk.
Yes.
And I've got a chapter on William Calk, and I found it, his journal exists. It's at the Kentucky History Center, and some of the greatest things, that really telling the story of this trip, this treacherous trip into Kentucky. But I really loved it because he said, well, they'd been at Boonesboro not long, but they were casting lots. Mm-hmm. For their property. Everybody was going to get a piece of property. So they were casting lots. And he said, I went fishing and I catched 3 cats. So it just led you to believe, he didn't really care much about the property. He'd rather go fishing. But then, one of his comrades was Enoch Smith. It's a wonderful gun builder. And, the only known Enoch Smith rifle is featured in the book. And he had moved on to Mount Sterling. Is pretty much given credit for settling, Mount Sterling, Kentucky. And his house still stands in Mount Sterling. But, he was a silversmith. Yeah. And actually the uncle of Asa Blanchard, our most revered and known silversmith in the state of Kentucky. Yeah. So it just all ties together.
It
These
really
men
all
ties
does.
Together, and the stories all blend together. And I'd somebody bought a book, and they wrote me this most wonderful letter and said, I sat down to thumb through it thinking that it was a coffee table book. And 5 hours later, I was only about a third through, and it read more like a novel,
It does. It reads like a novel.
Yeah. That's what I wanted, and it's all documented.
Yeah,
it's all true.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier that some people say that the name Kentucky Rifle came from the poem about the Kentuckians at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, January of 1815. And I just let me indulge the listener by reading just one paragraph from that poem, one verse. First of all, the name of the poem is called Hunters of Kentucky, or Half Horse and Half Alligator, which is what these Kentuckians refer to themselves as in the poem anyway. And it first of all sets up that the hunters of Kentucky went to New Orleans to reinforce Andrew Jackson's forces there, and that the British were attacked them, and then it reads as follows: "But Jackson he was wide awake, and was not scared of trifles, for well he knew what aim we'd take with our Kentucky rifles." So he led us down to the cypress swamp. The ground was low and mucky. There stood John Bull, meaning the British, in martial pomp, and there was old Kentucky. You can't get any better than that, Mel.
No, you can't. And okay, now I'm gonna go off on a tangent here.
Okay, go right
As Frank
ahead.
House would say, down a rabbit hole. All right, I grew up in Jamestown, Kentucky, on Lake Cumberland.
Yeah.
There's no iron ore there. Until I moved to eastern Kentucky, Carter County, Grayson, I was kind of, I'd seen an iron furnace, I think, at Land Between the Lakes or somewhere. But I didn't know anything about our iron industry.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that the iron industry in Kentucky was third in the nation until after 1830.
Yeah.
And the reason that I bring this up now, there's in Owingsville, Kentucky, right off of I-64 within a half a mile, there's an iron furnace. It was originally called the Bourbon Iron Furnace. Andrew Jackson bought almost all of the cannonballs and grape shot that was used at the Battle of New Orleans, and they were taken to Maysville by ox cart and sent down the river.
Yeah.
And it just flabbergasted me. Here's this iron furnace that's huge, and it's still standing, and it was fired for the first time in 1790, and it was nicknamed the Old Thunder Mill because of all of the ammunition that it was making. But really what it was set up for, we talked earlier about these hardships. When these people were coming in, they couldn't bring a plowshare. They couldn't bring an iron pot that they needed to boil salt water or to wash clothes in, or none of this. So as early as 1790, 2 years before we reached statehood, we've got an iron furnace that's fired up making 10-gallon kettles.
It's incredible.
And then by the War of 1812, you've got Andrew Jackson is ordering cannonballs from this place. And I just, again, there's a chapter on it in the book, and I've got a picture of Andrew Jackson on his horse, and there's cannonballs at his feet. And when I see that, still to this day, I can't keep from thinking, wonder if those cannonballs were made in Owensville, Kentucky.
Well, there were iron furnaces here in Lexington, in Fayette County. We have an Ironworks Pike.
Yes.
Which, of course, gets its name from that. Yeah, I mean, absolutely essential to life. Not to mention just making cannonballs. But like you say, iron pots, kettles to boil down water to salt, was just absolutely essential. And but your book again, it covers the entire tapestry of what it took to settle a place like Kentucky, and then what that artistry did for the generations thereafter to civilize this place.
Well, not just Kentucky, but the nation.
Oh yeah.
And I had a wonderful friend and mentor, and her name was Brooks Howard, and she worked with the Kentucky state government, the Kentucky.
Sure, I remember her.
Yeah. And she would always say, I could hardly ever have a conversation that she wouldn't say that Kentucky was the daughter of the East and the mother of the West.
Oh.
And I just think that says it so well because, there's still to this day, there's something about Kentucky. There's this cosmopolitan aspect of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And these people would come, and maybe it was only sojourn and they only stayed a few years, but then they went on to Missouri.
Yeah.
Then they went further west. And so many of the wonderful rifles that are featured in the book were found in Missouri and further west, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Like the Boones.
Yeah.
Like the Bryans.
Yeah.
All went to Missouri.
They did.
Yeah, they sure did. They sure did. Let me just talk for just a minute about Daniel Boone Bryan.
Okay.
Here in Fayette County. For those of you who are Kentuckians, you can see his grave at the Lexington Cemetery, along with all of his kin. He is the nephew of Daniel Boone, and but he settled originally out the what we call the Nicholasville Road at a place called Waveland, which has been a state property, a state historic property for quite some time. Tell us about Daniel Boone Bryan.
Well, in order for me to tell you about him, I want to tell you a little about his father.
Okay.
His father was William Bryan, and he was a gunsmith, and he was an armorer under General Griffith Rutherford in the Revolutionary War. Going back to the chapter a while ago, we talked about Jacob Young and the unexpected artistry chapter. One of the rifles that was made for Caspar Mansker, who is to Tennessee, kind of what Daniel Boone is to Kentucky. They were both armorers together. Thomas Simpson, and you had William Young, who was the father of Jacob Young, who obviously at least worked in close proximity to Thomas Simpson. And then you had William Bryan. Well, William come early on and settled Bryan Station and was killed by the Indians early on. But Daniel Boone Bryan, his son, was old enough. He was also listed as an armorer at that time. And he carried on this gunsmithing trade. And in the book, I've got a chapter talking about Lexington rifles. And there's different characteristics, but one specifically is this patch box that's kind of got almost a propeller-looking finial on the end of the box, kind of a flower or four-petal thing. And Daniel Boone Bryan is given the credit of designing or establishing this Lexington school of gun making. You can take a rifle that's made within a 30 or 40 square mile area of Lexington, Kentucky, and I can spot it 100 feet away just by its architecture.
Wow.
But he was very, very important. He had so much going on. He had a gunpowder mill. He was making gunpowder there. He had a Bible school. The house at Waveland that we know now, they actually tore down Daniel Bryan's old stone house, and his son, I believe it's Joseph Bryan, that built the house that's there now, the antebellum kind of house that's there now. But their story is Kentucky. Their story is coming in from North Carolina, settling in Kentucky, having tragedy. I mean, the father died early on. He wasn't here very long at all. But they've left such a mark in the produce. They're these wonderful artistic long rifles that they were making are still revered and sought after today. Maybe there's 25 that we know about.
Yeah. Well, his father, Daniel Boone Bryan's father, William, married Daniel Boone's sister.
Yes.
And Daniel Boone married William Bryan's sister. They were double first cousins.
That's right. Yeah.
So hence the name Daniel Boone Bryan.
Well, and two of the Bryan boys married Simpson girls. So it's all intermingled. The story all ties together.
Well, they always say that about Kentucky. You never speak ill of another Kentuckian at any function, party, or anything, because it's going to be his cousin, probably. But Daniel Boone Bryan really had quite an enterprise. I mean, it was almost a huge enterprise out there, and it was not only just making rifles, but it was just a whole lot of other things going on that he did. And I, as a kid, I worked out there at Waveland with Dr. Hamilton Tapp, who ran it then. And I remember the dining room of that house is the only room that has stone fireplaces at either end of the dining room.
Yes.
And it was always understood out there that was the cabin. That framed the cabin. of Daniel Boone Bryan, and which is now the dining room. Now it all has changed because it's a brick facade to the house and so forth. But you can still see the stone fireplaces. And wherever else in the house is brick. So something is different there than elsewhere. And it was always understood that was it. Whether that's so or not, I don't know. But this – and by the way, all those Bryans were buried out there first. But then they were all removed to the Lexington Cemetery. And Daniel Boone Bryan has quite a stone there now. But they're a very interesting crowd. The Bryans in particular – of course, the settlement of Bryan Station that was besieged in 1782 is one of the great stories of the American Revolution.
Well, and the Daughters of the American Revolution has just had that, the first monument that was produced by women, for women, was, I believe, in 1898, and it was like 2 or 3 years after the Daughters of the American Revolution had been formed, and it was the monument at Bryan Station. And there's this, this wonderful story of the siege. The fort was under siege. From their scouts, they knew there was a huge contingent of Shawnee, and the women realized they were out of water. So Mary Polly Hawkins Craig.
Whose picture you have in the book. I've never seen that before.
Oh, that was a coup. So she led these women down, that were scared to death, but they were banking on the Indians not getting them. But it literally saved the fort. They were able to bring water back, not just to drink, but to put out any fires that the Indians had tried to set. But here the story goes on further. You got Mary Polly Hawkins Craig, who was the mother of Elisha Craig, that's been credited at least for making some of the earliest bourbon whiskey in the state.
And who was a Baptist preacher, too.
That's right. And then his son, William Craig's powder horn, is in the book, and he was a surgeon at the Battle of the Thames, where Tecumseh was killed.
Well, that speaking of the Battle of the Thames, this for everybody is a battle fought in September 1813. And it is an engagement up not far from Detroit. It's a battle that occurred right after Oliver Hazard Perry's victory over the British on Lake Erie. And this is a Kentucky militia led by our first governor, Isaac Shelby, fighting British troops under Major General Henry Proctor, along with the tribes under Shawnee Chief Tecumseh and his Indian allies. And it's right near what they then called Moravian Town, which is what some people call the Battle of the Thames, is the Battle of Moravian Town. But this is where William Whitley and Simon Kenton, this is really their last certainly it is the last for William Whitley because he's killed in it. But it is the last really engagement you're going to see Simon Kenton in. These are aging guys. But tell the listeners, a little bit about the Battle of the Thames and William Whitley there.
Well, to me, one of the great things about this, of course, the Battle of the River Raisin had really slaughtered a bunch of Kentuckians, and there's something that we still have in Kentucky that amazes me, and it's patriotism. I think there's more patriotism in the state of Kentucky than anywhere I've ever encountered anywhere else in the United States.
I agree with you.
But they felt like, the Kentuckians felt like that Britain was trying to once again rob us of our freedoms. And they were ready when first of all, Isaac Shelby was our first governor, and he really did not want to be our fifth governor. But they come to him and said, hey, we need you. And he said, okay. He said, if I'm needed, I'll run. Of course, won the election with no problems. And then our ninth president, Harrison,
William Henry
Harrison, even wrote to Isaac Shelby and said, we need you. And, if you could, he had heard that he had 2,000 men, and he said, we'll take your 2,000 and more. And he literally gathered them up and But the Battle of the Thames, to me, the really heart and soul of the Battle of the Thames is something called the Forlorn Hope.
Yeah. When
Richard Mentor Johnson was kind of the leader, if you will, and Isaac Shelby was somewhat under him, and the British had already kind of left, but you had Tecumseh and the Shawnee that were really making some headway, and he called for 20 volunteers. Mm-hmm. And he knew it was going to be kind of a suicide mission, but he felt like that they was at a point that if they didn't do something, they were going to lose this battle. And they were going to go through the middle. They were going to ride through the middle of the Indians, and kind of that would give a chance for people to circle and give them a different battle advantage. And that's what he did. And William Whitley, at 64 years old, was the first to volunteer.
Can you imagine? 64.
64 years old. Right. And there were 16, when at the first volley of shots, 16 of these men were shot off of their horses and killed. There was only one man that wasn't wounded, and his name was Garrett Wall. Mm-hmm. And his horse took a bullet between the eyes that was meant for him, and it dropped him under the line of fire. So he wasn't wounded. And Garrett, William Whitley was indeed killed. His rifle and his powder horn was brought back to him and given to his wife. And it's now at the William Whitley house. But Garrett Wall's rifle and powder horn stayed with the family. He come back. He was kind of a farmer, if you will, and there's a journal, ledger of where that he was raising corn for the liquor industry and sawing wood, and he stayed in Georgetown. His powder horn was made by Francis Tansel, and we mentioned this briefly early on. Wow. But the Tansel family revived a fad to have highly art engraved powder horns. The French and Indian War, they'd been very popular. They kind of fell out of service during the Revolutionary War, and they were out of vogue until this Athens of the West. The Bryans were making these wonderful rifles. And you had Francis Tansel that had been a ship's captain, so he knew all about scrimshaw and those designs. And he moved into Georgetown, Kentucky in 1798. The first horn that we know that he made is dated 1802. But this Garrett Wall's powder horn is huge, and it's obvious it's been made for him to carry to the Battle of the Thames. Think about this. These old men had fought in the Revolutionary War. Uh-huh. Their guns and powder horns and stuff was wore out. Yeah. So they had to have new kits. William Whitley was carrying a brand new rifle that was made by Jacob Young. And Jacob Young made him this huge powder horn that the rhyme on it's just wonderful. But anyway, we've now discovered there's at least 9 of these large powder horns that once upon a time you would have thought that they were kind of a supply horn, but they hold like 3 pounds of powder. Well, if you were leaving to Kentucky and you knew you were going to Chatham, Ontario, Canada, you're going to carry a lot of gunpowder.
You're darn right.
So anyway, that was one of the great things for the book. And, I said early on that the book was inspired by this exhibit that was at the Kentucky History Center. And for the first time since the Battle of the Thames, the day of the Forlorn Hope, William Whitley's rifle and powder horn was put back together with Garrett Wall's rifle and powder horn. And they had been separated. An older son had inherited the powder horn, and it had been sold 20-some years ago, and it has been known in the powder horn world as a masterpiece. Yeah. And a fifth great-granddaughter of Garrett Wall sold Garrett Wall's rifle, and the two were able to be put back together. And it's a Kentucky treasure.
Yeah, just totally incredible. I love the era so much. The folks listening, if they travel into Kentucky, go down to Stanford, Kentucky, and take the old US 150. The early one. There's a modern one that's out that's gone past it now. But take the Main Street in Stanford. You'll come to the William Whitley House, and It's the first brick house ever built in Kentucky. It's got WW in the brickwork over the entranceway, the door. And in there, you'll be able to see for yourself the rifle carried by William Whitley at the Battle of the Thames.
Well, I also want to kind of interject here. Not only does it say WW on the front, it's now been covered by a kitchen, but it says EW on the back. And that's for Esther Whitley, his wife.
His wife, isn't that neat?
And, you know, so often the women are not mentioned, but here as early as this first brick house that's made in Kentucky, he thought enough of his wife to put her initials on in the bricks of this house. And Esther is known as a wonderful marksman, as a wonderful shot. And the friendly Indians that would come there, you know, he would bet that Esther could beat them. And then those Indians, they loved to go back and get other Indians, and they'd bet that Esther could beat them, you know. So she was quite the novelty. And even on his wonderful rifle that he was carrying when he was killed at the Battle of the Thames, not only does it say WW on the silver in the side plate, it also says EW.
Does it really?
So there was really a family connection. Here was a man that was revering and giving respect to his wife as early as 1780 here in Frontier, Kentucky.
Yeah.
Listen, Kentucky's a remarkable place. It was then, it is now. It's special. It's magical. And I forgot something earlier, and I've got to spit this in here. Okay. You know, I was talking about the challenge from Pennsylvania over the name of the rifle. Well, we went to Pennsylvania and we shot them. And that was actually the beginning of the Kentucky Corps of Long Riflemen.
Yeah.
And we beat them. So all of a sudden now they want to go double or nothing. So then about 3 weeks later at the Daniel Boone Festival in Barbersville, which we're still having today, we beat them for the second time.
Were you among them? Were you?
No, I wasn't. And some of there's very few of the people that were shooting in that match then that's still alive. And, but what Governor Scranton had done is he had borrowed an original 1816 Pennsylvania rifle. Mm-hmm. From the Pennsylvania Historical Society. Yeah. So he'd borrowed this and put it up for a prize, never thinking that the Kentuckians is going to beat him. Well, we've still got that rifle here in Kentucky. And it hung over all of the governor's desk for years and years. And I think Wendell Ford was the last governor that it was on the wall. And it kind of got lost. I didn't know where it was at. And while I was working with the Kentucky Historical Society, I mentioned it, and the curator there said, I know where it's at. It said it's hanging behind the adjutant general's desk. Said I have to fill out loan papers. They never give it to us. So we have to fill out loan papers so we can keep this rifle in Kentucky. I
remember as a kid going to, it was then at the Perryville battlefield.
Yeah.
Where the Kentucky Long Riflemen were having their tryouts, so to speak.
Yep.
And I remember speaking to this one fellow, Ralph Markham.
Oh, absolutely. Ralph just has died just in the last month.
I saw that. Ralph, he stood out in the crowd. He was a short fellow, but he stood out in the crowd because he had these black buckskins on.
That's Ralph.
And I was attracted to that. And I went over and chatted with him, and he goes, I said, are you trying out? He says, yeah. I said, I make my own rifles. And that was one of the first people I ever ran into who made his own. You're another, of course. But Ralph said, and I got to get this thing through because I got to go back and put the boarding on my house. And I said, where do you live? He said, I live in Sand Gap, which is a little town, by the way.
Just the other side of McKee.
Just on the other side of McKee, in the mountains above Berea. Yeah. And I said, really, why do you have to rush to put the boarding? Well, it'll all curl up because it's a full moon out there. And there I got wind. This guy is right off the frontier.
Yeah.
He is right off the frontier. But you're right. The Kentucky Corps of Long Riflemen were just unbeaten. Pennsylvania couldn't come close to them.
No, they couldn't.
Which, by the way, bears up the verse in the poem, for well he knew what aim we'd take with our Kentucky rifles.
That's right.
Listen, my friend, this has been just a blast to talk to you. I have so many thoughts in my head, so many stories that have run through my head that I wanted to bring up with you, and there's just not enough time in the day.
Yes.
But one, I want you to tell everybody now how and where they can buy your book.
Okay. Have I got time to say just a few words
Sure.
about the last chapter in the book is called A Tapestry of Cultural Fabric. And that's more than anything else what I want people to understand. This is not a gun book, even though there's maybe 35 or 40% of the book is on the study of the American long rifle. But it's an artistic thing. And I started to say early on that we're living in this age that people throw up this wall. They don't like this name rifle or gun. And for some reason, they cannot look at it as an art form. So what I wanted to do is to intermingle this iconic Kentucky long rifle in with all of these other items that are always recognized as art forms. Mm-hmm. And the last chapter of the book, what I've done is there's a wonderful cherry inlaid with bellflower drops on its legs, a sideboard that was made about 1790 in Frankfurt. Mm-hmm. And on top of that is a miniature sugar chest that, all of the Kentucky antique collectors, if they don't have a sugar chest, boy, they're looking for one. Mm-hmm. And then I've got pottery from Maysville, Kentucky, the Woods Brothers pottery. And then there's a miniature on ivory by Matthew Harris Jewett, our most celebrated, portrait artist. Right. And then hanging on the wall is a painting of a little girl by Joseph Henry Bush, and it's his little niece. And then there's a pistol that was Kentucky made and belonged to William Crabtree and was used at the Battle of Kings Mountain. But when you look at this photograph of all of these things, nothing's out of place.
Yeah.
There's a powder horn. There's a flintlock pistol. There's art. There's furniture. There's all of these different splotches of color that make up this cultural fabric of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And that's what the book is about. It's truly the story of the western migration of America.
Right.
But it's told through these historic icons and their makers and their owners,
right,
here in the state of Kentucky.
Yeah.
I shot myself in the book. The book is $79.95. Mm-hmm. I've had so many people said, "Can I get that on Amazon? Can I get it here or there?" Everybody wants to do a 40% wholesale thing, and at 40%, I'm losing $7 a book. So my wife and I have done all of the retailing. I've got a web page, and it's intothebluegrass.net. Mm-hmm. You can do a search for Mel Hankla, MELHANKLA. My email address is melhankla@amhiss.com. That stands for American Historic Services. You can order that book through my email, directly through me. I sign them all. I handle them all. They're all wrapped in shrink wrap. I unwrap them. I inspect the book. I sign it. If you want it inscribed, I'll inscribe it. And shipping, the best I can do is $8.55. So the book with shipping is $88.50. Yeah. There's also a deluxe version. There's a signature edition. The only reason that I was able to afford to do this book and not call for sponsorships is I'd done a subscription, and there were 162 or 3 people subscribed to the book and donated, if you will, $275 to the project. And for them, I had 250 copies of a leather-bound, cased in a leather-bound slipcase. And those 250 books have an additional 33 pages of information. They have a story that was written by noted Kentucky collector Mac Cox. Mm-hmm. He has done a wonderful research study on a group of paintings. He calls them the Red family paintings, and they descended from Matthew Harris Jewett and Oliver Fraser and different ones. But we added in those books, those 250 copies, they are now $300. And there's 31 copies of those left if anybody wanted an investment book, something of a collector's item.
Yeah. Mac Cox is a wonderful fellow back in Sharon, and
Yes.
They were contributors to the production of yours, and they've contributed to a film we made on the Lincolns in Kentucky.
Yes.
They're totally devoted to the history of this place.
Absolutely.
Great people, and gosh, it's been fun. I could go on, Mel. Reminds me of sitting with Mel, sitting with Clem.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. That's really, what a compliment. What a great compliment.
Well, it is. By the way, I love your quote about Clem, about he telling a group that looking into a campfire. He said, that is the same thing you'd see, that they would have been seen by prehistoric man.
Yep.
And it's the only thing left that man has not screwed up.
Yeah. He used a lot of French in there, too.
I bet he did. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna close out with I'm going to read you just 2 verses of The Hunters of Kentucky, and we'll close with this.
Okay.
This is, they're seeing the British come at them. This is the Battle of New Orleans. They did not let our patience tire, they meaning the British, before they showed their faces. We did not choose to waste our fire, so snugly kept our places. But when so near we saw them wink, we thought it time to stop 'em. And 'twould have done you good to think, to see Kentuckians drop 'em. They found at last 'twas vain to fight, where lead was all the booty, and so they wisely took to flight and left us all our beauty, meaning the women in New Orleans. And now if danger e'er annoys, remember what our trade is. Just send for us Kentucky boys, and we'll protect ye ladies. Thank you so much, Mel.
Thank you. It's been an honor. It's so much fun.
Yeah, great fun. Thank you.
Bye now.
This podcast is produced at Dynamics Productions in Lexington, Kentucky, with Neil Kesterson as the audio producer and editor. Your gifts help support the production of this podcast. If you are interested in sponsoring the podcast on a one-time or even a monthly basis, please write to us at gmbrown@witnessinghistory.org. Thanks for listening.